Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Magic is Real, where I, Shannon, interview near death experiencers and people with other spiritually transformative experiences. And we talk about all things metaphysical and spiritual. Today, I am very fortunate to have with me Angela Harris, who is, hi, Angela, a near death experiencer, she has had several near death experiences. She's also the director of IANDS Groups and Events. IANDS is the International Association for Near Death Studies. And we had the privilege of seeing each other at the last conference in Phoenix. It was wonderful. So I was really happy to meet her in person. And now I'm really happy to have her here to share her spiritual journey and her incredible insights with all of you. And I just want to say one thing. If you like this podcast, would you do me a favor, please, and just like the videos? And every comment helps with engagement and helps the podcast to grow. So any kind of engagement, that's a way you can support the podcast for free. Thank you so much. Just like, share, comment, all those things. I really appreciate you being here. And without further ado, Angela, welcome. I am so happy to have you here. And I would love to start by just talking about you, the person, how you came into this world, anything you're comfortable sharing about your childhood and your spiritual beliefs or lack thereof. I know that your interactions with spirit go way, way back. So, really, wherever you'd like to start talking about yourself.
Thank you, Shannon. It's great to be here. Yeah, growing up, I didn't have much religion in my life except during the summers. So my parents worked, and I would go and spend the summers with my grandparents. And it was both sets of grandparents living in the same kind of small area in central Michigan. And my dad's parents were not religious really at all, or if they had religion, they didn't talk about it. So from that standpoint, my parents then didn't go to church. So I didn't go to church. One set of grandparents didn't go to church. But my mom's mom was very religious. She would take me to church with her on Sundays during the summer. So, maybe I'd go twice a year. But it was a very, what I define as dogmatic church. It was one of those churches where if you didn't do things the way they said that you should do it, and you didn't believe in Jesus and you didn't believe in God, then you were going to hell. That was just flat out the way it was for them. To the point that I was at a funeral for one of my aunts who was one of the sweetest, most loving people I have met in my entire life. And I'm 52 years old, and I can still say that. My grandmother openly told people at the funeral that she was going to hell because she didn't believe in God and Jesus. So it was very much a defined part of her belief set. So I had that. And I think that was a real marker for me because I just kind of went forward from there thinking, whoa, that does not make sense to me. That doesn't align with me. She was a loving, sweet person. How can you say she's going to go to hell when all I ever saw her do was love? And that may actually be in alignment. I don't remember what year that was, but I do remember when I was a child, I fell and hit my head on a tree, and I got stuck on a branch. My dad pulled me off, and I was bleeding profusely. And I think I bled out or close to it. Um, and I was about 7, 8 years old. My mom took me in. My mom and dad laid me down on the sofa on a bunch of towels. But I don't really remember that part because as we were approaching the door to the house and my mom opened the door, the last thing I remember are my bloody hands, blood on my dad's face, probably from my hands or whatever, and my mom turning white. Like I literally remember the door opening. There's my mom. She's like ghostly pale immediately. That's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember is I was up in the left hand corner of the room over the door, floating, if you will. So I was having an out of body NDE experience. And I was being held in the arms of an entity, a non human entity, angel, if you will, if you like that term. And I was facing the floor. So, kind of, if I had had a body at that time, would have been belly down towards the floor. And the angel had her arms around me, like she was holding me up. But it didn't feel like she was holding me up. It was much more a loving embrace and messages just of everything's going to be okay. You're all right. I could see my mother sitting on the sofa. I could see my body on the other sofa. And I could see outside of the room into the driveway where the ambulance was, my father, and the EMT. I could hear them talking. I could see my mother crying. And I felt the black void, that I went into a black velvety void in my second near death experience. And I felt that there. I don't remember going into it, but I could feel like a slipping into it, a sense of movement towards it. And then I remember my mom standing up and shouting my dad's name and saying, she's awake, as I kind of came awake on the sofa. So it was a very short experience. But I think that in that experience, and from talking with other childhood experiencers, I've really come to understand that even though I didn't have the terminology to explain that experience, I didn't have situations where I was prompted to or put into a mental space to think about it again, even. It profoundly affected me. It ripped open my remembrance of who we are, really. And that stuck with me. And then my soul forever after was in situations like I was just expressing with my grandmother, saying, hey, this woman could have been as loving and sweet as Jesus and God Himself, defined by humanity, but she's still got to go to hell because she didn't believe in them. Really was like so painful to me. I mean, I viscerally feel it when things like that occur around me, to the point of, you'd be on the playground and kids are getting in fights with each other. And I just couldn't. I couldn't even be around it. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't engage with it. And I've been like that my whole life, which unfortunately it results in, kind of an isolation, because it's hard to hang out with people who like gossip and, having those kind of negative conversations. So that's how I went through my childhood, a little bit of a loner because I had a hard time connecting in that way, and feeling a little bit separate. And again, there's the childhood experiencer group through IANDS, and being in that group and talking to people who had other childhood experiences, we're all like, oh my gosh, I went through the same thing. This is exactly what I was going through. And it feels so good to know that it was that experience that set me down that path. But it's also powerful to have that intuition in your life, because it's also been kind of helpful in other ways. So, and then, I went off into life after that.
Yeah, and right after that happened the first time, did you automatically start to feel you mentioned intuition, but were you receiving messages, like loud messages from the spirit world, or did you kind of just block that out for a while? Did you notice what was different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't remember messages because, and I think again, it wasn't intrusive if I was getting them, and I know that I was, and I'll mention that in a second. But it's more that knowing, right? And in that knowing, I've always I've always had, the voice in the head, and we all do. I mean, even if
Yeah,
you want to deny that you do, it's there. You talk to yourself. And I realized in my second experience that I'm not talking to myself. I'm actually talking to my life guides
right.
plural, right? That is those messages. I didn't recognize that before I had my second experience, but looking back now, I can definitely say, oh, yeah, I've been talking to my life guide, Melanie, my whole life. She has a British accent. That's why, now, and that makes it easy because now I don't always recognize it. Sometimes I just blow past it. But when I hear it and I realize, whoa, that's Melanie. That's that British cadence.
Yeah.
And then also too, looking back, I can say, wow, I was having a lot of spiritual experiences that I didn't acknowledge as spiritual experiences at the time because again, I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have the vocabulary. I just wasn't there. Again, I was just kind of trucking on through and doing what
Yeah.
people do and not taking the time to sit within my spirituality. And I'm sad about that. I think my life would have been um, better. Yeah, I know it would have been better. I'm trying to articulate to you how it would have been better. It would have been more loving. Like, for instance, I've thought about when I had my kids. Man, if I had known then what I know now, that would have been so incredible to carry
Yeah.
it with that knowledge and to give birth to them with that knowledge and to hold them as babies with that kind of knowledge. So beautiful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. As a medium, I now teach when I teach other people the art of intuition, mediumship. I tell people that a lot of the things that happen in your head, in your mind, that you think is your own voice, when you really tune into it and start to be aware, you realize that this whole time you have been connecting with the other realms and other entities besides yourself, and not all of it. A lot of it's you, and a lot of it, when you listen, realize that didn't come from me. And yeah, wouldn't and now life is so much easier for me. And yes, wouldn't it be great if we could go back and soothe ourselves or cope better with the world, knowing what we know now? But that's part of the journey. And we also have to be in this world to have the lessons
Right.
that,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So as you teach that and you engage with it, where do you feel your voice, Shannon's voice, ends and the other begins? Because if we think about consciousness as one,
yeah.
how does that interplay come together?
Oh,
I feel there's
yeah.
a soft area there where I really start to slip out of my humanity and back into my soul's consciousness, which is then so much more than just one.
Yes. Yeah, it's a really good question and a good sort of, I don't want to say hypothetical question, but it's like something that we don't give thought to. And even when people think mediums, some see spirit, I don't. I feel them and I hear them. But what I explain is people are surprised, as I was when I learned about it, is that it sounds the same as my own thought. It's context. So, and the only way I really know is that it's context. Like if I'm doing a reading for you and I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of this thing, and you say, oh, that's a reference to something that happened in my childhood. I would have just thought I just thought about Cracker Jacks. I don't know why, And then you go, oh, well, that's because my grandfather always gave me Cracker Jacks or whatever. So I wouldn't pay attention unless I had someone to bounce it off of where's that coming from? So now I listen. And I'm like, why did the other day I just was with a friend, two medium friends, and I suddenly just saw a boomerang flying across, I could see it very clearly. It was like wooden and it had the Aboriginal painting on it because I had one as a kid that came from, I was born in Australia. So I think it was Australia, might have been New Zealand. And so I was like, I know that's a thing. Before I wouldn't have even thought twice. Now I'm waiting. I'm like, we're going to see how this comes back because I know I saw it. I know it came from somewhere. And there's no reason why in the middle of a conversation, um, you know, so it's really interesting. And then so yeah, what were you doing through where did you go in your life and what were your I know you had a family and that kind of thing, but what was sort of your goal in life or your what were your aspirations?
Yeah, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to serve. And I can say that that's not really surprising given my childhood experience that I want to be around and helpful to people in need. So I became an elementary school teacher. I did that for more than 10 years. Unfortunately, I have a neurological illness. And one of the things you should be doing with this illness is standing up for long periods of
Oh,
time. And that's what teachers do. They stand all day long.
yeah.
There's walking around in the classroom, but I can walk around all day, but I really can't go for more than, say, 20 minutes before I start to. It's really interesting. I start to go numb. Like start losing the ability to talk. My I don't know, movement becomes just a general issue.
Yeah.
And I figured that out when I was teaching one day. I really wasn't feeling well. Went to the nurse. My blood pressure was through the roof. And she said, I really want you to go to your doctor right away. But you can't drive yourself. Someone has to drive you. It was the middle of the day. Who's going to drive me? Plus, I'm a teacher. And I'm like, teachers don't abandon their kids during the middle
Yeah.
of the day. I'm staying. I can make it. I'll be fine. But I didn't make it. And I ended up leaving in an ambulance. But they didn't find anything because it wasn't my heart that was causing the problem. It was my neurology. So it wasn't until I went to a neurologist, probably about 4 months later, that the neurologist took one look at me and said, oh, you have this thing called essential tremor plus. It's like Parkinson's, it just has a different
Yeah.
cause and it doesn't progress as fast. But please go see this movement disorder specialist at the University of Texas in Houston. I did that. Eventually, I ended up on a tilt table. The point of the tilt table is to prove or disprove if your brain and your body are talking to each other appropriately. And the way they do that is they stop you from having the ability to move because every time you move, it causes it's like a little extra heart, especially when you move your legs. It
Yeah.
pumps your blood back up. So they strap you down so that you can't move. And my vital signs went down like a ski slope. And at 18 minutes, I went into seizures. And I don't even remember the seizures other than seeing them when I popped out of my body, was facing myself, sort of, because it's 360-degree vision, because you don't have a body. So,
Yeah.
there's that whole aspect of it. And so the first thing I saw was myself in seizures, but I didn't feel anything about the body. I only vaguely, in these very fast seconds, I guess, that went by, even had any slight recognition that that's me. I just didn't care. It was like, that car's broken down, no big deal, moving on. So I'm out of my body, and I was on this side, on Earth's side. I was gone for about 32 seconds, but all this stuff happened, which defies time. So even at that point, I had already left time as it exists on Earth by leaving my body. And this is an example of that. So I popped out of my body. The seizures are going on. My head drops. The nurse who is sitting in front of me gets up. She goes through my body. I see kind of like the front of her face and then the back of her head, which gives a hint to a position, even though I didn't have a body, which I find very interesting. And then I could see my husband and the doctor. I could hear them. I knew what they were thinking. So there was this whole immersive situation. If I thought outside of the room, I was immediately there, right back in that space at that particular time, even though I was existing in a space where there wasn't time. I thought of my kids, I could see my kids. All at the same time, as all of this is happening, I'm going back to the same place I did when it was my childhood experience. So I had a sensation of moving backwards to the upper left corner of this very small room. And I felt the exact same thing of this black velvety tunnel, if you will, black velvety space that I slipped into this time. So I just kept right on going into this black velvety space. And yeah, I met my life guide there, Melanie. And then I went into a kind of like heaven's waiting room, if you will. We went through this black space towards a light. We went into the light, it encompassed us, and inside the room were family and friends from this life and past lives that I've had. It was incredible to see everyone. The love was amazing. It started when I popped out of my body and it just kept growing and becoming more and more and more. And I got to greet them and hug them. And when I did, all of these memories came flooding back from both sides. So my memories and their memories all together. And we both got to experience each other's side of it, not just seeing it, but being there. It's the smells, the sounds, the the feeling of everything, the warmth of sun on your skin. It was just so immersive. And to me, that is a view into when you're on the other side and you're thinking about, or let's look at it this way, you're a medium and you're talking to your, say, daughter. You've passed, you've transitioned to the other side, and you're wanting to send a message to your daughter. I think I didn't do that this time, so I don't have direct memory of it, but I think when you're there and you're doing that from the other side, you're in the room. You feel it, you hear it, you smell it. I think you can feel the touch even though you're not there, of whoever you're talking to. So when we talk about people coming and visiting us, I think they're getting a really deep experience as much as they choose to have to see us, which is hard to believe. I mean, if you back up and think about, well, how are they doing that from a physics standpoint? How
Yeah.
does this work? And then why do they go back to the other side? Why can't I see them? There's a lot going on there that is expressive of this really high intelligence beyond anything that it's even possible for us to comprehend, I think, on this side. So, yes, I saw my family, but I feel like you asked me a question and maybe I'm getting a little off track.
No, you did perfect. No, this is exactly where I wanted to go.
Okay.
I was just
Yes.
asking what happened next for you and what that looked like, and that was exactly it. And I really think it's interesting too, again, from a medium standpoint, you're talking about what it's like to be the quote unquote the ghost. I know that we don't call them ghosts, it's spirit, but it is interesting. Oh yeah, I never thought about, well, I have thought about it, but I didn't hear it quite the way that you just described it. What it's like to communicate with the human from the other side and what that feels like. And it's so interesting that you said like this full immersive experience. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's just a hallucination that happens because your brain is protecting itself with endorphins and you're hallucinating. But the people that I speak with, and you included, have relayed that it is more real than this. You know when you're dreaming. You know, and you don't always know when you're hallucinating if you have schizophrenia or you're on some kind of a psychedelic drug or something, but it is a real experience. And I know Vinnie Tolman said the same thing about it is actually a place. It's not an idea, a concept, a vibration. It is literally a place, which reminded me of the movie Defending Your Life with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. And Albert Brooks, yeah, I always get the two Brooks mixed up. And so, yeah, I would love to hear. Well, and we'll get into how, because I want to hear how you came out of that and what. Let's do that first. Just want to know because I want to get into all the kind of insights about it as well. But how did you re-enter the body and how did you feel?
Okay. Yeah. Well, and going back for just a second to what you're
Yeah.
talking about mediumship and how it's real because it's not you. I've definitely had
Yeah.
those experiences where, like I was saying with Melanie, she has a British voice, but beyond that, that's not, I don't even talk like that.
Yeah.
That's not my cadence. Those aren't words I use. You just, and it's hard for people who aren't okay when we say, you just know. That's that intuition again of
Absolutely.
you just know. Yeah. So I had much more experience and I can expound upon that or I can
Yeah.
answer your
Oh no,
question.
keep going. Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Yeah. So from there, um, I met my family. I had my family. Um, I learned a lot in that. Like I connected with a friend pardon me, in high school who committed suicide, and that was such a beautiful experience. I learned so much about how that person felt about me and the kind gestures that I made towards him that other people were not really doing. He was very intuitive and could tell the difference between when someone was authentic and when they weren't. And it was very meaningful to him that I just joyously loved him for who he was. And then from there, I really started to come home to, okay, I think I'm dead. And I started to remember and have questions, I guess, in my remembrance about who am I? What have I done? Year from past lives. And as soon as I would think about those things, I would go and experience some aspect of it. So um, I started to realize this is not just me, that I'm not a one-time thing, that I live in this space and then I go to Earth and I experience stuff and then I come back and that's it and we're done. No, I've done this millions of times. This has happened over and over and over again, and not just on Earth. I'm doing this as well on other planets as other non-human beings. And I went and saw myself as probably an Arcturian. I'm not sure, but this being was expressing as a female kind of feeling, blue, very soft features, bald, which is why I question whether it was Arcturian, because usually the Arcturians have like magnificent hair, right? So
Yeah.
not sure, but it doesn't mean that just because she's bald, everyone's bald. So very tiny body too. That's the other part that makes me question whether or not this was an Arcturian. So very small shoulders, very slim neck, um, a, a larger head in that the chin was still very small, but the forehead area was larger and higher. Uh, Eyes and skin were the same color, but the same kind of human features that we have. So the eyes were in the same place, nose was in the same place, mouth was in the same place. Very small mouth, very long, soft nose that was indicated by very small nostril shadows and just the slightest shadows along here. Big almond shaped eyes that, I mean, even as I'm saying it, Shannon, I can see them and they're just so like cat like, I think is a
Mhm.
good example. You know how when you're looking at a cat and the light goes into their eyes and it goes deep, and you can really see just everything that's in there, the beauty and the reflection. And in the moment, I'm realizing this is me. This is me now. This is part of my soul. So Angela's back on earth, and, there's that. But at the same time as me, right now, sitting in this chair, she is me
Mhm.
there, which that is a hard thing
Yeah.
to think about for a lot of people, that because there's just this sense of self that we have here that I think is preservation,
Yeah.
but we're so much more powerful, so much more expansive. And I think that's expressive of us being one, that I can be here and I can be there. And both of us jetting around in our little squishy bodies, right? These souls incarnated in these little meaty vehicles are the same soul. So, how does that then take your understanding of the one consciousness and really expand it? So, if I am her and I am also another being, which I'll talk about, and who knows how many others, because I didn't access them or probably more likely don't remember them after coming back, then how are you and I connected through all of that? How are you and I the same? So I kind of thought about this as this Rubik's Cube kind of analogy, where if you think about Rubik's Cubes and how you can take a piece off of the Rubik's Cube and put it back on, I kind of feel like we're like that, that our souls are multi pieced. I want to say faceted because faceted gives this sense of glimmer and shine and expansiveness, right? So we all kind of separate from the center of the Rubik's Cube and we go off and we get into shenanigans around the universe and have fun and also make mistakes. And then at night, while we're sleeping, this is another thing that I understand and brought back. We go home and we
Yeah.
connect and we talk to each other. And that's that sharing your information with the universe. That's a part of how that works. And then our my Rubik's Cube say, it's not that's hard to say. It's not my Rubik's Cube, it's my soul's Rubik's Cube, right? And
Mm,
all the pieces
yeah.
of my soul coming together. It's like one little square on a bigger Rubik's Cube, which I guess you might call a soul family. And then that soul family's Rubik's Cube locked together is a square on a even bigger Rubik's Cube and going on from there. Really complicated and interesting and beautiful. So the other self that I remember seeing is a mantis being and looks very much like an ant. That kind of rusty red exoskeleton, very much like you think of an ant, upright, very, very large, 10 plus feet, 13 feet maybe. Um, Black eyes on the more on the sides of the head, uh, two little antennae that were really cute on the top of the face, and then the standard kind of body, with the legs that are kind of backwards rather than knees pointing forwards like ours, and then a sense of like military power, might. Um, yeah, and then this kind of black covering. So on the back, like almost like scales. So I'm going to go this way. So like a black piece, and then underneath that, another black piece. If you think about like the Chinese ancient paper, um, words escaping me, but like a covering you'd wear in war, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that, like layered over top of each other. But I got the feeling it was more, it looked like leather. Can't say for sure because I don't know for sure, but layered like that across the back, so across the thorax and the abdomen, a hat, and then the hand, or I don't know, hand. Let's use hand because people can relate to that. Was more like like this sort of,
Hmm.
so like fused together and then and holding kind of like a scepter, if you will. Neither of these situations, I have glimmers of memories, but I can't fully remember right now. Maybe a regression would help, um, of what was in the background. So,
Yeah.
real view or remembrance right now of a room they were in, or a city, or nature, or anything like that, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's hard to explain,
It is.
but as you're seeing these beings, did you see them from the outside, but you just knew it was you, or did you actually embody them? Like, were you in? I guess you. I'm assuming it's the former, just because of the way you're able to describe all of the details of their features. I would assume you're sort of looking at them, but also with that kid you went to high school with, did I'm assuming it's all telepathic too. Like it wasn't like he's like, "Hey, thanks so much for doing this." It's more just like you saw him, but did you actually see him or did you just know it was him from his soul energy? And were you able to just understand? That's again, as a medium, that's actually the way that I communicate with spirit is telepathically and feelings. I don't see them standing next to you, but I imagine them I can sort of in my mind's eye imagine them. So I know it's really hard to explain because it's like nothing that we have reference to here.
Yes. So when I saw myself in these other non-human beings, I kind of went through space and I
Yeah.
could see space moving past me. And it was so quick. I came up on each of them over their left shoulder. Why? What is up with left? It's always left in these experiences with me.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Mine's always right, which is so funny. I
yeah.
don't know why. Yeah.
So I came up on their left shoulder. They turned and looked at me. So our eyes met. And in that, it was like being at home again. It was like arriving in heaven and just love and recognition and compassion. There was a lot of feeling of, wow, look at you and what you're doing here as this being. And it's so incredible. And then it was so fast. There was just that recognition,
Yeah.
seeing each other, and then I kind of backed out and went forward again.
Hmm.
So, yeah, and
Yeah.
the sense of movement is a whole other thing too, because it didn't have a body.
Yeah.
And how do you, like you're saying, it's ineffable. And my friend that I saw in heaven, everyone that I saw in heaven, they were there and they were themselves, as I remembered them more as a child or teenager, or kind of in that high space of life with them, when I
Hmm.
was engaging with them the most and had the deepest relationship with them. That's how I remembered them,
Yeah.
and that's what they looked like. Another way to say that is that's how these souls chose to present themselves to me in that moment,
Hmm.
right? So that I would be comfortable going into that space and being with them and not maybe freak out. I don't know. But so yes, when I saw him, I hugged him. And that's just like with the rest of my family members, when I was able to just embrace both of our experiences together, even though they were brief. I mean, I only knew him for, well, I guess junior high and high school. And so let's say that would have been 5 years. I knew him for 5 years, but I never did anything social with him. It was always just in class or at lunch or that.
Yeah.
So, but even so, it was so meaningful to him,
Yeah.
which is a message to everyone that even just saying hi, patting someone on the back, it can change their whole life.
Yeah, I often have souls come through when someone comes to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm looking to connect." They don't tell me because I tell them, "Don't tell me who you want to connect with." But sometimes before the main character comes in, it will be someone from the past where it's like a kid from when they were 15 who's like, "You treated me really well." And to you, you treated everyone well because you were a kind person and you saw the best in everyone. But to them, you stood out as somebody that really made I'm getting chills, that you really so just like you said, you don't have to be best friends, but to just really see somebody when they don't feel seen and to be
Yes.
kind when they're the butt of jokes and, or being bullied or whatever. And it was easy for you to be kind, so you probably didn't think much about it, just as someone who bullied was like, it was easy to bully because I was in fear. And so you don't necessarily at that age have that self-awareness, but it does mean so much. So, like you said, the message is just smile at someone every day, hold a door open, um, and those little tiny things that we take for granted because we're empaths and I just know, for you, I just know that you are, like me, we just want to love people. And so, we're like, I didn't do anything. I'm just being me, but it really does make a difference.
Mhm.
So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I'll let you continue on with the story, but I know, yeah.
Yeah. And as I was saying, it's kind of like it felt like a stream to me, a stream of knowledge that I just had access to everything. And I was swimming in the stream, remembering all of these things about who we truly are, my true self, and the true self of all of humanity and all of existence, from the planets to all of the people, entities living on all of the planets across all of the universes throughout all of the dimensions that have those things going on. So I would then just have a thought and go off. And one place I went was, so I was thinking about my family. And when I would think about my family, I was in this white, kind of cottony, soft space that had no indications of ceilings or floors. It just kind of was white all around us. And a portal would open up, and I would see my husband. And then another, because they weren't in the same room, I think, another portal would open up, and I'd see my kids. And I would just, you know, then zip off to wherever. And one of the things that I thought about when I saw my husband and my kids was, what about their futures? Because here I am on the other side, and what's going to happen? And a couple of things happened there. I was able to, when I looked at my kids, see them glimmering, is what I call it. So flipping back and forth between the child they were then, when I was having this experience, and then the adult that they were going to become. And I saw my oldest daughter at the time, Lily, as a man. And as Lily grew older, and I knew this from when Lily was a baby, Lily never wanted to wear frilly dresses. Lily always wanted the cargo pants so she could stick like sticks and rocks and frogs and things like that in it. My dryer sounded insanely loud because of all the pebbles that were in the dryer. Good times. So, yeah, eventually, and I never mentioned this to Lily. I never talked about it. I just let Lily do what Lily was going to do. And eventually, one day, Lily said, Mom, I'm a boy, and my name is Adam. And we began the transition process. But I saw that in my experience,
Yeah.
which I had previously, when I was incarnated in my body, saw it coming and experienced it, but then saw it in this, future of my child, it actually occurring. So it's incredible what you can experience there. And I don't understand time there at all. There seems to be a lack of time.
Yeah.
How am I in a space that has no time, but recognizing my past that I just lived, and then also seeing my child's future?
Yeah.
What's going on there? That's again points to this incredible intelligence that we don't have access to from here under this
Mhm.
veil, right? And then also in that, I was thinking about, well, what about their futures? And I was able to see that if I stayed on that side, they'd be fine. My husband would remarry this great woman who would take care of them, and they grow up and they do the exact same thing. So Lily still would transition to Adam, Carolyn would still go off to college and become a doctor, and everything would be great. And also then that extended into this like farther future where we go into another world war, and there's really it's based on migration, and migration on a lot of different levels. When I say migration, a lot of people tend to think about people who are not feeling safe living where they're living, and they're coming into other countries to live. But there's a lot of migration underneath that, which is migration of people, and we're kind of seeing it now, this split in the United States, a migration away from each other,
Yeah.
a migration towards a certain set of feelings and beliefs because of what you need in that situation. So even just different levels of migration and how that results in this war. And then throughout the war, there's a lot of loss of life, and we end up with a much smaller population across the globe. And people come out of it um, really feeling like this whole sense of difference between ourselves is irrelevant and not something that we should be thinking about. And our society, cultures move into a space of we're all much more one. And we live in these smaller communities where it's much more sustainable. We live off the land around us, and we grow our own things. We still have cell phones and satellites and TVs and things like that and cars, but we don't feel this sense to go everywhere all the time and to, import things from China. because we realize, wow, that's one, we don't have the population to do it at the start, but then also that that's not what's right for the planet, and we are part of the planet, so we can't be doing things like that. We have to live in our own space, in our own ways, in a much more healthier kind of environment for everyone. So that was a very beautiful future to see, just to see this unity among everyone. And then beyond that, I started to see us kind of slip back towards, you know, we had cell phones and the internet and all that. And so we started, but we did get to it. And eventually it's an ebb and flow situation
Yeah.
from that. I guess that's the best way to describe that. And then I also then went through a life review, and it's very much like people say it was kind of like watching a movie and highs and lows. And I saw my father, interacted with my father in my life review. My father was abused as a child. He perpetrated the exact same abuse on me because that's what he knew. And I could see from the other side that we actually planned that. So if you've
Mhm.
seen Betty Guadagno's story, she talks about going through the grocery store and picking, pain and anguish. And that's, yeah, I mean, I totally relate to what she's saying. That's what helps us grow. So we come here actually to experience, in my experience from the
Yeah.
other side, I'm saying from my own viewpoint, we come here to experience all of it, not just love and joy and living in bliss. Though I'd like to sit on the sofa all day long in the sunshine and eat bonbons, drink tea, and pet my dog, unfortunately, that doesn't make me grow. What makes me grow is having hard moments, shedding tears, pain. I mean, pain of all different kinds. And I saw in that experience, watching my relationship with my father and understanding it from this other side, from my angelic self, that was what we chose together. I chose to come here to suffer abuse from him, to give him a chance to grow and learn and change and move out of that, which helps his soul grow and learn and change and understand that kind of situation. It's very hard to hear when you're the one suffering the abuse that you agreed to it on some level. I'm not making that sound any lighter. I'm not telling you, if you're a person who's suffering and listening right now, that that makes it okay. I'm just sharing with you that that's what I experienced and what I saw. And I hope that it can be helpful. And at the end of my life review, because I was watching myself live this life and I was in my angelic state again, I was really thinking, wow, I didn't do as good of a job as I wanted to. And what do you do? Because I was still tied to my body a little bit. I thought for just a second, maybe I should do that purgatory hell thing they talk about. And at the exact same time, Melanie, my life guide's like, well, let's talk about this, and but my mother-in-law who had passed from lung cancer, who was there, was kind of like the lead person of the people who'd come to greet me, is right next to me, and she says, my mother-in-law says to me, well, and to Melanie, she can't stay. She has to go take care of the kids. And I woke up on the tilt table on Earth. So yes, I did not take that lightly, by the way. I do take care of the kids, adults
Right. Y
and youthful ones.
yeah.
So once I woke up in my body, it was dark and hot and squishy and wet and tight, but also contrary to that, when I say tight, it felt like my soul was being shoved into this tiny little. So I'm going to use a shoe analogy here. Like if you tried to put on a shoe that was like three sizes too small,
Mhm.
it wasn't working. It didn't feel comfortable. I felt way too big for the space. But also, like if you had a tiny little foot in this big shoe, I also kind of felt that because I was looking, like feeling into my body, and it was just this expansive black space. And I kind of grew then into that space. Pardon me. My nose is running. So I grew kind of back into my body. And at the same time, I kind of opened my eyes because all of a sudden there's all this noise from the machines and the nurse talking to the doctor. And I open my eyes and I look up, and there are two paddles. Like she's literally standing right in the paddles are like right in front of my eyes. And I did not want to be back in my body. I had been in so much pain and trying to just keep myself going, and I wasn't realizing it because the degradation of my illness, I guess, had been so slow over so many years. I didn't really realize what was happening to me. But when I left my body, I had this realization of, wow, I feel so much better. And I had seen my family's going to be fine.
Yeah.
They'll do fine. Their futures are great too without me if I stay on the other side. So I closed my eyes and I prayed as hard as I could. I wished so hard, and probably people were like, "Why is she squeezing her eyes so tightly shut?" But I thought if I just closed my eyes again and wished for it, I could go back to the other side. And I spent a bit of time like that on the table, just with my eyes closed, and I could hear the doctor. My husband was wanting to come to me. I could hear the doctor saying, she just needs a minute. And eventually I was like, this isn't working. So I got up and I didn't say anything because one, I had just died, and that's pretty traumatic. I was just trying to get myself back online. Talking was not easy for me. My mouth did not want to move. And I had just seen my husband's mother, who had passed not that long before. In that moment, it didn't really feel like the right time to say, hey, you just watched your wife die. And I had this experience on the other side where I saw your mom. And in the middle of a medical room, that not the space to do that is really what I was feeling and hearing at that time. And the doctor was giving me all these instructions about how I was supposed to handle myself over the course of the next week and month, and then the rest of my life to try to manage my symptoms. But in there, he did say, because I'm sure I had this dazed look on my face. I was eating a cookie and drinking juice, and he said, "Huh, are you feeling okay? Did you see something interesting?" And I
Oh,
didn't take the time. I remember stopping and thinking, yeah, but if I say something, then my poor husband here is going to hear me talking about this, and I want it to be hours, right? Not
mhm.
like, so I didn't say anything, but that would have been veridical evidence. So,
Yeah.
oh
I
well.
know, I know. So many people are afraid to say it, but I think a lot of doctors are very open to it because they've heard it before.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
especially probably him because, he's doing that
yeah,
all day long every day.
yeah. And I know the adjustment coming back is very difficult for, I, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I would say a lot of people, if not most people. So it's not, even though it sounds like such a beautiful experience, it's also pretty difficult trying to, as you said, squeeze yourself back into your body and then deal with the density of this world and the conflict in this world. Um, and with that, I know that we wanted to talk about oneness, which I think, of course, the election just happened and we don't have to talk about that, but just because there's so much division, I think it is really important. It's a really good time to talk about what your insights, what you learned, what you know, and what you feel about the concept of oneness.
Mhm. Yes. And that's a big part of my experience. So I was one with my family that I had had here on earth, my friends, one with people, if you will, from other lives. I was one with myself living on other planets in other bodies. I was one with my father who was still incarnated in this life review. In my childhood experience, I was one with my mother in law, which I remembered that angel being in my childhood experience was my mother in law, who was incarnated and awake at that time, living in the same city. So all of this points to a underlying oneness that ties us all together. We talked about the Rubik's Cube and how, we're all facets of this one expansiveness. And when we're here in our bodies, living our lives, not really taking the time to think about it, when you hear oneness, I know I used to think, oh, yeah, okay, I'm one with humanity. And I didn't really want to step outside of that, right? I didn't want to take the time for it. Probably wouldn't have been entirely comfortable with it because I didn't feel the safety of it, to talk about it and step into that space. So, what my experience really points to is that it's much broader than that and much deeper than that. When near death experiencers talk about oneness, we're talking about it being us in our bodies right now, being one with everything on this planet. Everything on this planet has consciousness in it, even the Ziploc bag that's holding your sandwich right now. I know it's hard to believe. I do. I was there, but it's true. So there's this oneness amongst everything here. And that oneness is this consciousness that we talk about. That consciousness is the love that experiencers talk about. Love is our true self, it's our true being. It's the foundation from which we come from. So I always point to on the Gaia channel, Matthias Stefano has the initiation series. He does a brilliant job explaining what I'm referring to. I highly recommend that people watch it. It's basically like consciousness or love wanted to learn about itself and grow and expand. And we are an extension of that. So it just expanded and expanded and expanded. And you are a tiny little part of that. A lot of people hear frequently, you are a wave on the ocean or a drop of water in the ocean. And that's another great analogy to think about how when we think of the ocean, we think of it as one entity, right? One collective thing, but it isn't. It's actually a lot of little cells of water that are coming together to make this one big entity. And that's what I saw for myself on the other side. I was able to take a little step out of this life and not just see it, but remember it because that's where we're truly from. That's home. That's the real space, as you were saying earlier, Shannon. That's this. It's not an illusion. You're really here. You're really incarnated. You're really doing this. So we have to come home to that and understanding that as a part of this incarnation and really being here and really doing this, that we're also so much more. You are nature living a life here, but you are also spirit, not bound to this planet, not bound to this life, and able to step outside of it in meditation, in sleep. And I do it all day long within my own life. I'm constantly one step in this world and one step in the other, walking around in awe and wonder at the beauty of the planet I live on and I'm incarnated on right now, while also looking at it as it's not just this gorgeous sky and this beautiful tree in front of me. It's another being, another soul here playing and having fun. So yeah, one one is much bigger than just humanity.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Angela. And there's so many I mean, these kinds of conversations could go on and on and on, but I think that's a really beautiful way to end this episode of this podcast today. And I really appreciate you just sharing your time. And I so appreciate you too telling the story so many times over and over. But it is important because a lot of people have heard your story, but not all. And so it is important, especially as we said now, to remember who we are, remember to be kind, and that really it sounds hippy dippy, but it's like love is all there is and love is all that matters. And we often forget that because we're all traumatized, we've been hurt, we've seen a lot of stuff, we're in fear, and people lash out at each other and create enemies when, as you said, we're all one. And unfortunately, when we come here, a lot of us forget that. And they're not even, and a lot of us are not even willing to look at that. So it does create this dynamic where, we're not here to recruit anybody into this way of thinking, but it is just something to really think about and try to remember your true nature, especially at times like this when emotions are high, people are afraid. And so it's really important, these conversations. And I thank you for taking the time and energy to be here with me and my audience.
Thank you for having me here and for allowing me to expound upon my experience and talk about what I learned from it and how that can be helpful for other people. Because to me, that's the juicy part. That's the important part.
It is. It is. Yeah. Thank you for being of service in that way, Angela. So,
Yeah,
Angela Harris, appreciate you. And I will be speaking
likewise.
with you very soon.